The day I got stuck in an elevator with my CEO, I had a ketchup stain on the inside cuff of my shirt that I had been folding out of sight since breakfast and a stack of editorial briefs under my arm that nobody had asked me to annotate but that I had annotated anyway because that was exactly the kind of thing I did and nobody ever rewarded me for. My name is Marcus Webb, and at the time I was 25 years old, 18 months into a job at a mid-sized media and content company called Archfield Group, based out of Chicago, working in a department called Audience Strategy that sounded important and was mostly just me cleaning up data other people had generated sloppily and building reports that got forwarded without my name attached. I was good at it. That is the part that haunted me a little. I was good enough to keep getting handed more of it, but not good enough in anybody's calculation to be handed something better. There is a specific kind of invisible that people like me carry around in professional buildings. The kind where you are useful the same way a coffee machine is useful. Nobody thinks about it. Nobody thanks it. They just use it and walk away and expect it to be working again by morning. I had been that coffee machine for a year and a half. The morning it all cracked open was a Thursday in November. I had gotten to the building early because I had a projection model that needed correcting before a 9 a.m. briefing I was not technically attending but whose materials I had been asked to finalize. The elevator bank on the ground floor had 4 cars. 2 were full. 1 was sitting open and empty, and I stepped into it holding those annotated briefs and a travel mug that was already losing heat and a bag that dug into my shoulder in a specific way that had left a small bruised line I had stopped noticing. The doors started closing. A hand came through. I knew who Joanna Reed was the way most people at Archfield knew her. From a distance that felt more like a concept than an actual person. She had started the company in her mid-30s with 2 other people in a rented office above a print shop, and over 20 years she had turned it into something with 400 employees and a client list that included names you would recognize. She was in her late 50s now, and she moved through the building the way rivers move. Not stopping. Not adjusting. Everything else just making room. I had seen her at the all-hands meetings twice. I had seen her in the lobby once from far enough away that she could have been a photograph of herself. She stepped into the elevator and looked at the panel and hit the button for the top floor. I was already holding 12. Neither of us said anything. Then the elevator stopped. Not slowed. Not shuttered. Just stopped. The lights stayed on. The floor display between 6 and 7 locked and went blank, and the little number just sat there, frozen, like it had made up its mind. Joanna pressed the door open button. Nothing. She pressed the emergency call button, and a recorded voice told us that building services had been notified and would respond as quickly as possible. The line had the specific quality of a recording that had been made by someone who did not believe the thing they were saying. She exhaled through her nose and looked at the ceiling for exactly 2 seconds. Not panicking. Calculating. Then she looked at me. Not the way she had looked at me when she stepped in. That had been furniture level. This was actual eye contact. "What floor did we stop on?" she said. Not a question really. More like she was delegating the problem. "Between 6 and 7, I said. "Display went out right when it stopped. It's probably a control board issue. If it was a cable failure, we would have felt it differently." She looked at me for a moment. "You know elevators. My uncle maintained them for 20 years. You pick things up." Her expression did not change exactly, but something behind it shifted. Like a filing cabinet drawer opening and something being placed inside it. She tried her phone. 1 bar, unreliable. She sent a short text to someone and then looked at the space around us the way you look at a room you are going to have to inhabit for longer than you planned. Then she sat down on the floor. I don't mean dramatically. I mean practically, the way you sit down when standing is just wasteful. Back against the wall, knees slightly bent, phone resting on 1 knee. I stood there with the briefs under my arm. "You can sit," she said. "This is going to take a while." I sat across from her and set the briefs on my lap and the travel mug on the floor beside me and tried to look like someone who was comfortable sitting on the floor of a stalled elevator with the person who signed the checks for the entire building. "What are those?" she said, looking at the briefs. "Editorial strategy briefs for the Henderson account. 3rd quarter wrap." She tilted her head. "Henderson went on review last month." "Yes." The briefs had some gaps in the audience segmentation. I went through them. She was quiet for a second. "Did anyone ask you to do that?" "No." Another pause. "Where do you sit?" Audience strategy. 18th floor. She looked at me with the specific attention of someone who was processing more than the words. There is a kind of listening that is actually an audit, and she was doing it, and I could feel it even then. She asked me 3 questions about the Henderson segmentation in the next 10 minutes. Not casual questions. Specific ones. The kind that would have caught me if I had only skimmed the material instead of actually read it. I had actually read it, so I answered them, and she listened to each answer with that same quality of attention, filing things somewhere I could not see. At one point she said, "Why did you annotate briefs for a meeting you were not attending?" I thought about giving her the safe answer. Something about team contribution or proactive support. Instead, I told her the truth. Because I could see the gaps, and it seemed like a waste to know something and not say it. She looked at me for a long moment after that. Then building services finally crackled through on the intercom. They were apologetic in a vague way and promised someone would have us out within 40 minutes. Joanna thanked them in 3 words and ended the conversation. We were in that elevator for 51 minutes total. Long enough for the air to stop feeling like an emergency and start feeling like a room. She asked me at one point where I had worked before Archfield. I told her. She asked what I had done there. I told her that too. She asked why I left. I said I thought I was taking a step up and found out I was taking a step sideways. She nodded at that like it confirmed something. When they forced the doors open, 2 maintenance workers were on the other side looking relieved in the way people look when a situation they were responsible for did not end badly. Joanna stood up, and she was already talking to her phone before she cleared the threshold. She thanked the maintenance team in the same 3-word economy she used for everything and walked toward the stairwell. Then she stopped and turned back. "Marcus," she said. I had not told her my name. "I know what floor you sit on," she said. "Someone will find you." And then she was gone up the stairwell, and I was standing in the hallway between the 6th and 7th floors with my briefs and my travel mug and the very distinct feeling that something had just happened, but I had no idea yet what it was. I went back to my desk and spent the morning finishing the projection model and sending it to the briefing team and getting exactly 0 acknowledgement about it. I ate lunch at my desk. I got 3 requests from a senior content manager named Derek who had a talent for framing his own work as a favor to me. I handled all 3 and sent them back and did not hear anything. I told myself the elevator was just a weird morning. Then, on Friday afternoon, I got a calendar invitation. It was from Joanna Reed's assistant. It put me on the distribution list for something called Archfield Forward Planning, which was the quarterly strategic review cycle that lived 3 floors and several tax brackets above anything I had ever touched. The other names on the list were 2 division heads, a vice president of content development, a senior director I recognized from company-wide emails, and me. I read it twice, then a 3rd time. Then I replied that I would attend and closed my laptop and walked to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror for about 10 seconds doing nothing in particular. The forward planning session was the following Tuesday in a conference room on the top floor that had a view of the city that made you feel like the city was a thing you were responsible for. I was there 8 minutes early because being late was not an option I was willing to take, and being on time felt like a risk. The room filled with people who had the specific ease of being exactly where they expected to be. They set down laptops and poured coffee and talked about things I had not been told about yet. I sat toward the end of the table and opened my notes. Joanna came in exactly at the meeting time. Not 1 minute early, not 30 seconds late. On the exact second, which told you something about how she thought time worked. She sat at the head of the table and looked around it. When she reached me, she gave a brief nod. The same nod she gave the division head to her left. Unremarkable, flat, expected, like I had always been there. Which meant that to this room, starting now, I had. An hour into the session, a vice president named Raymond was walking through 3rd quarter content performance, and the numbers he was using had a sourcing problem I had spotted in the underlying data 3 weeks earlier when I was pulling something for Derek. The numbers were not wrong exactly, but they were incomplete in a way that made the conclusion softer than it should have been. 2 people were nodding along like the conclusion was settled. I was aware that I was a 25-year-old who had been in this building for 18 months, and that the person speaking had been in the industry for 22 years, and that the correct move according to every survival instinct I had was to let it go. I let the next sentence land. Then the next. Then I said, There's a gap in the Q3 poll that affects the engagement metric on page 4. The distributed content segment is missing the partnership channel. It changes the actual number by about 11%. The room went quiet. Not loud quiet, professional quiet. The kind where everyone keeps their face neutral and waits to see who confirms or denies. Raymond looked at his page. Then at me. Where are you pulling that from? The source data. I went through it last month for a different project. I can send you the breakdown after the session if that's useful. He looked at Joanna. She looked at me. Send it today, she said. Before end of business. I sent it at 3:15. By Wednesday morning, 3 things had happened. 1. Raymond's slide had been updated. 2. I had received a short email from Joanna's assistant asking me to block Thursday at 5 p.m. 3. Derek had appeared at my desk with the specific energy of someone who had heard something he did not like and was trying to figure out how much I knew. Nice move in the planning session, he said, leaning against my partition in a way that was designed to look casual. He was 5 years older than me and had been at Archfield for 3 of them and had a careful relationship with visibility. He collected proximity to important people the way some people collect points on a loyalty card. Not because they love the brand. Because they want the reward. I told him I just caught something in the data. He said data corrections are usually better handled offline. More collaborative that way. I said I would keep that in mind. He smiled the way people smile when they are noting something down. Then he went back to his desk. Thursday at 5 p.m. I went to Joanna's office. It was in the corner of the top floor with windows on 2 sides and the kind of quiet that expensive square footage buys. She was standing at the side table rather than behind her desk, reading something with a pen in her hand, jacket still on, which meant she had been in meetings until very recently and had not bothered to settle in before I arrived. She said, "Sit down," without looking up. I sat. She put the paper down and turned and looked at me with the same direct quality she had had in the elevator. No warm-up, no small talk to make the room feel comfortable. She said, "The Henderson account is going into a second phase. The audience segmentation strategy needs rebuilding from the data up. I want you on it." I said, "I currently report to content strategy." She said, "I know where you report." That is not what I said. Which meant it was already handled and she was telling me rather than asking. I said, "All right." She looked at me for a second. "You are not going to ask what the project involves. I figured you would tell me what I needed to know." She picked up her pen again. Something about that answer seemed to land the way she wanted it to. Not impressed. Just noted. She walked me through the project in 12 minutes. Specific, fast, no language wasted. She pointed at 2 problems in the existing strategy framework the way you point at a structural crack in a wall, not interested in describing how the crack got there, only in whether the right person is going to fix it. I asked 1 question. She answered it and moved on. On my way out she said, "You are going to hear things about being visible. People confuse visibility with proximity. They are not the same. Visibility is something you earn. Proximity is something people give themselves." Then she turned back to her papers. I walked to the elevator and stood there for a second before I pressed the button and thought about that sentence the whole ride down. The Henderson project put me in rooms I had not been in before. Not in a dramatic way. There was no announcement, no title change, no ceremony. I just started showing up in places that used to be 3 levels above where I sat and nobody stopped me because Joanna's name was on the thread and her name was load-bearing. People recalculated fast. That was what I noticed first. The ones who had never spoken to me directly started speaking to me directly. The ones who had treated me like someone who carried boxes started treating me like someone who might be asked about them. Nobody explained the change out loud. Nobody had to. The adjustment just happened, the way temperature adjusts when the weather shifts. Derek noticed before most people. He had been watching my calendar. I figured that out when he asked me a specific question about the Henderson timeline that I had only seen in a document that was not on his distribution. He had pieced it together from something, which meant he was paying close enough attention to piece things together. He started inserting himself into adjacent conversations. Not on the Henderson project itself, he could not do that without it being obvious, but on the surrounding context. He would volunteer information about related accounts in team meetings. He would copy himself into email chains that touched topics nearby. He was building a bridge to visibility through association, which was a real strategy, and I had to admit he was executing it with some precision. The problem for Derek was that Joanna was not interested in association. She was interested in the thing itself. For weeks into the Henderson rebuild, she called me into a client preparation session I had not been scheduled to attend. She just sent a message to my phone that said, "Room 22, 2 p.m. Bring what you have on the engagement framework." I brought it. In that room were 2 senior clients, a division head, and 2 people from the external partner team. The kind of meeting where the preparation had probably taken 3 people 2 weeks and where the wrong answer could set back a relationship that was worth real money. One of the clients asked a specific question about how the new segmentation model would handle behavioral overlap in the platform data. It was a technical question dressed in business language, and the division head gave a business answer that did not fully address the technical part. Joanna looked at me. I answered it. Clean, specific, not long. I used one example to illustrate the point and then stopped talking. The client nodded. His colleague wrote something down. The room shifted. It was small, and then it was permanent. After the session, the division head found me in the hallway. He was a man named Carl who had been at Archfield for 11 years, and who I had previously only experienced as a name on documents I reformatted. He said, "Where have you been for the last 2 years?" I said, 18th floor. He shook his head once like this was personally inconvenient to him. Then he said, "I want you copied on the partner correspondence going forward." That conversation took 30 seconds. But what it meant took about a week to fully arrive. Because after Carl, other people followed. Not dramatically. One by one, quietly, the way trust moves through a professional network when someone whose judgment is respected has already made a decision. I started getting included in things not because I had positioned myself into them, but because people whose opinion moved other people's opinions had updated their file on me. Derek, meanwhile, sent an email to Joanna's assistant volunteering himself for the partner coordination work on Henderson. The assistant replied thanking him for his interest. I heard nothing more about it. She was fast. That was the thing you noticed immediately and never stopped noticing. Her mind did not move through problems the way most people's minds did. She did not build up to conclusions. She was at the conclusion before you had finished explaining the problem, and then she was already 3 steps past it, looking at the thing the conclusion created. Working with her was like running beside someone who had been running every day for 30 years while you were still figuring out your form. But she was also patient in a specific way. She did not slow down. She never performed patience. But when she asked you a question and you were working through the answer, she gave you the space to work through it. She did not fill the air to make herself feel useful. She waited. And something about being waited for by someone who did not wait for many people made you find the answer faster. We started having late working sessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It was never announced as a thing. She would message me after 6 and say she was still in the office and needed a second pass on whatever was currently in motion, and I would go up and we would work until the building got quiet around us. Those evenings were different from the rest of the week. Not because the work changed. Because the version of her that showed up in those rooms was slightly less assembled than the one in the daytime sessions. Not the public version. The actual one. She thought out loud when it was just the 2 of us in a way she did not when there was an audience. She asked questions she actually did not know the answers to, which I came to understand was rare for her, and she received the answers differently than she received information in group settings. Less filtering. More direct processing. She asked me one Thursday evening while we were going through a budget forecast what I wanted from the company in the long run. Not the polished answer. The real one. I said I was tired of knowing things that were useful and having them used without my name on them. She looked at me for a moment. That is an honest answer. I figured you would notice if I gave you the other kind. She almost smiled. Not quite, but something in that direction. Then she said, "Quiet people in rooms full of noise get treated like furniture. You cannot blame the room for that entirely." I looked at her. I said, "Does that mean I should be louder?" She said, "It means you should stop giving the room permission to overlook you. There is a difference." I sat with that one for a long time after I went home. The night things shifted had no drama in it. That was the part one kept coming back to later. It was a late session in December. Cold outside, the windows doing that thing where the city lights blur slightly at the edges when the temperature drops. We had been working for 2 hours on a client renewal framework and had finally gotten it to a place that felt clean and defensible. I was closing my laptop and she was reviewing the last page of notes when she said, without looking up, "You know this situation has complicated things." I said, "I know." She looked up then. Not the assessing look she used in professional settings. Something closer to plain. She said, "I do not do things without reason. That is probably something you have worked out by now." I said yes. She set the notes down. The original reason was that I saw someone in an elevator who was better than what they were being used for. That part was simple. I waited. The part that became less simple, she said, came later. She held my gaze. "I want you to know that I am aware of what that means and what it costs you in terms of how people talk. And I want you to know it was not a calculation." I said, "I know that." She looked at me for another second. "How?" I said, "Because everything else you do is a calculation. When something is not, it shows." The room held that. Outside, traffic moved somewhere below us. The heat in the building ticked in the vents. She said, "You should probably head home." I said, "All right." At the door I stopped and turned back. She was looking at the notes again, but she had not picked up the pen. I said, "For what it is worth, it has never felt simple on my side either." She looked up. I left. Nothing changed the next morning in any visible way. She was precise and brief and professional in the 3 interactions we had before noon. I was in 2 meetings and sent 4 emails and reformatted a distribution model that a content manager had assembled incorrectly. The building moved around us the way buildings do, ordinary and indifferent. But something had been said that could not be unsaid. And we both knew it. And somehow that made the work sessions easier rather than harder, the way naming a thing that has been in the room for a long time clears the air rather than complicates it. Derek made his final real move in January. He went around me to the partner team on Henderson and sent them a revised segmentation brief that incorporated pieces of my methodology without the sourcing. Not stolen exactly. Translated. The kind of thing you could defend technically, but that was indefensible in terms of intent. He sent it directly rather than through the internal project chain, which meant it landed with the partner team before anyone at Archfield could review it. The partner team flagged it to Carl. Carl flagged it to Joanna. Joanna forwarded it to me at 7 in the morning with one line. "Come in early." I was there at 7:40. She had the email open on her screen when I walked in. She did not make a speech about it. She just said, "Is this yours?" I looked at it and said yes in the important parts. She looked at me, and I said I had not shared it with him directly and I did not know how he had the underlying framework, but it was possible he had accessed the working folder before the permissions were tightened. She said, "Are you going to tell me I should deal with it carefully because he is a senior team member?" I said, "I am going to tell you the truth and let you decide what careful means." She turned back to her screen and typed one email. Short. I could not read it, but it took less than a minute. By the following week, Derek had been moved to a project that was geographically and strategically as far from Joanna's division as the building allowed. Nobody announced it. The desk just changed. After that, the office went quiet around me in the specific way that happens when a room has decided the outcome of something. People who had been watching to see where things landed stopped watching because the landing had happened. I was not furniture anymore. I was not a question anymore. I was just there at the level I had arrived at, and the room had adjusted. The turn I remember most came in February. Joanna was supposed to present the annual content strategy review to Archfield's largest account. The meeting had been scheduled for 3 months. The client was difficult in the specific way that clients who pay the most money are often difficult, which is that they expected everything to be perfect and communicated their dissatisfaction in ways that were expensive. The night before, Joanna's mother had a medical emergency in another city. She called me from the car at 9 p.m. She said, "I need you in that room tomorrow." Not supporting. Leading. I said, "Joanna, you know this account better than anyone in the building." She said, "I know. Which is why I am telling you that you can do it. I have watched you for 4 months and I have never given you a room you were not ready for. Trust that I know the difference." I held the phone for a second. She said, "The deck is final. The talking points are in the main folder. Legal cleared the contract language this afternoon. Be there at 8 and call me when it is done." Then she said, "Marcus," that same way she had said it once before, "stop standing in front of the version of yourself from a year ago. He is not in the room anymore." She ended the call. I sat in my apartment for about 10 minutes doing nothing useful. Then I opened the deck and went through it page by page and made 8 notes in the margins and set an alarm for 6 a.m. and went to sleep. The meeting lasted 2 hours. I will not pretend I was not terrified walking in. I was. My pulse was louder than the ambient noise in the lobby on the way up to the client's floor, and I was aware of every small thing about my appearance and preparation in a way I had not been since my first week at Archfield. But when the room settled and the client started asking questions, something happened that I had not expected. I knew the answers, not because I had crammed for them, because I had been living in this material for 4 months and Joanna had been pulling me into every room where the hard questions lived and I had been answering them and the answers had been right enough to keep getting invited back. The preparation was the months. The meeting was just the test. The client's lead asked a question in the second hour that had an edge in it, the kind designed to find the ceiling of your knowledge and see how you handle hitting it. I answered what I knew and said clearly what I would confirm and send by end of day. No deflection. No filler. Just the clean line between what I had and what I would get. He nodded. His team kept writing. I called Joanna when I got to the lobby. She picked up on the second ring. She said, "How did it go?" I said, "They signed the letter of intent." Silence for 2 seconds. Then she said, "Of course they did." I laughed. I could not help it. She said, "I will be back Thursday. We will debrief properly." I stood on the sidewalk outside the client building with February cold, moving through my jacket and the city going about its business around me, and I thought about the elevator. The stopped display. The floor between 6 and 7. The ketchup stain I had been hiding since breakfast. Joanna sitting on the floor like the practical option was the only one worth taking. I had walked into that elevator as someone the building could not quite see. I walked out of that client meeting as someone the building had no choice but to look at. That is not a clean story with a neat lesson. I know that. Joanna saw something in me, yes, but she also built the conditions that let me see it in myself, and those two things are not as separate as people want them to be. You can have every quality required and still disappear in the wrong environment. And you can have the right environment and squander it if you are not willing to actually show up when the room gets hard. I showed up. She created the room. And eventually I stopped being able to tell the difference between the career she was building and the person I was becoming. They had turned into the same thing. If you have ever had someone see something in you before you could see it yourself, drop it in the comments. I want to hear what happened next.